Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and today we are going to learn a little intro into dynamics and how to create some fun compositions inside of Cinema 4D. Let's learn how. Alright, so in this tutorial we're going to get a little intro into dynamics and create a composition not much unlike this little composition. So what's going on here? We have a bunch of dynamic spherical clones that are filling up a volume and creating this cool little shape. So you can replace this with a logo or whatever you want to do, but we're going to get a nice little intro to dynamics and learn how we can fill up some volumes and create this cool little logo reveal. So let's go ahead and create a whole new composition, and let's just start off by just discussing what the heck dynamics are. Well, dynamics are Cinema 4D's real-world physics engine. So it applies things like gravity and inertia and balance and friction to objects. So what I'm going to do is create a sphere, move it on up, and where we can actually apply real-world physics or dynamics to objects is by right-clicking them, going to the simulation tags, and this is where we're going to be living in this tutorial. Basically these two options, the rigid body and collider body. We're not going to cover soft body, but if you want to learn about soft body, have a whole tutorial dedicated to soft body dynamics. But we're just going to deal with rigid body and collider body for now. So rigid body dynamics is what we're going to use. And when you apply a rigid body dynamics tag to an object, by default, you can see as I hit play, our sphere just kind of falls and drops. So it applies real-world physics, it applies gravity to my object, and so my object just falls. So this actually can interact and collide into other objects as well. So what we're going to do is create another object, like a plane or a floor, to collide into this sphere. So what I'm going to do is hit play again. You're going to see that our sphere just falls through our plane, and that is because we have no dynamics tag on this plane object, so it's excluded from the dynamic simulation. So what we need to do is right-click this plane, go back into our simulations tag, and apply a collider body to it. And the collider body is very aptly named. Basically what a collider body is it allows other dynamic objects to collide into it, but it does not apply physics or gravity to the object. So when I apply a collider body to this plane, you're going to see that my plane doesn't fall. There's no gravity applied to the plane, but it allows other dynamic objects to collide into it, hence collider body. So very simple, easy stuff, very basic level. We just applied some dynamics to our scene. You can move this sphere up even more, have more of an impact. Hit play. But on the very basic level, that is dynamics. It applies gravity and real-world physics to objects in your scene. We also have collider bodies to have objects collide into objects. So very simple. Let's take this a step further. Let's rebuild this and again fill up like a box with a logo inside of it with clones or spheres. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing we need to do is actually create an emitter that emits dynamic spheres that we can then use to fill up that box or that cube and reveal that logo or that little diamond shape. So what we're going to do is we can find emitters underneath the simulate menu, go all the way down to particles, and we'll grab this emitter. And if you're familiar with particular in After Effects, trapcode particular, this is going to be very not unlike that. So right off the get-go, we have particles emitting. But you're going to notice that when I hit render, nothing's going to actually render because these are just little placeholders, little particle placeholders. What we need to do is actually define a shape, just like you would define a shape for a particular. We can do the same thing and define a shape for the emitter. So we want to emit some spheres. Let's go ahead and create a sphere, and let's just make this sphere a little bit smaller, something like that. And to make a object emit from an emitter, we just simply have to place it as a child underneath our emitter. and then go ahead and say show objects, because if we don't have show objects on, it's just gonna emit these little placeholders. But the moment we say show objects, we're actually going to use that object that is the child of the emitter as the emitter geometry. Great, so we have some of these basic options here. We have the birth rate editor, which is how many particles per 30 frames that will emit. And then we have the renderer. And basically the difference between editor and renderer is that if you had 1,000 of these, you're actually going to bog down your system a little bit. And you can see that we're really bogging it down. So what you want to do is, this is just like a viewport optimizer. So what you can say is, you know what, in my viewport, I just want to have 100 show up, but when I actually render, I want 1,000 to render. So that's just kind of like a scene optimization thing, but for this tutorial's sake, we're just going to make sure these numbers are the same. So when we are looking at our viewport, we're also going to render the same amount of particles. And you can see that we're still getting kind of slow feedback in our viewport. This render instances is going to optimize and save some of this stuff in RAM. So it's going to speed up the simulation. You can see that when we go and do that 1,000 again, you're going to see that it's much faster. So I like to work with this render instances on. It optimizes your RAM and just makes it way easier to work with a bunch of little particle spheres. So what we're going to do, bring this back to 100, and let's just cover a few more of these options here. So we have the lifetime, which is basically the lifetime of your sphere or of your particle. So if I say a lifetime of 50, it's going to emit, and then after 50 frames, these particles are going to die or just disappear. For this composition, we're just going to leave this at 600 because we actually don't want these particles to die. We want them to live and be happy. So what we're going to do is, one thing we are going to manipulate and change is this stop emission. So start emission is where the particles start emitting, and stop emission is the frame that our emitter stops emitting frames. So if I say stop emission at frame 20, I'm going to have emission of particles, and then at frame 20, it's going to stop. So this is one thing we're going to be changing very shortly. So we'll just leave that 150 for now. So what we need to do first is we have our spheres. We have them being emitted, but they're not dynamic. So we need to apply a dynamics tag to our emitter. And what we're going to do is just go ahead, go to simulation tags, again, rigid body, because we want gravity and all that good stuff to be applied to our emitted spheres. And we're going to hit play and see what happens. You're going to see that by default, we really just applied gravity to our emitter. So our emitter just falls and drops as it's emitting. But actually what we want to do is go a little bit deeper in the dynamics tag settings and say, hey, I actually want all these spheres that are being emitted to actually be dynamic. So we need to change a few settings in this collision field right here. So right now we have this option called inherit tag, and what this allows you to do is apply the dynamics options to children. Since we have our sphere as a children, we're going to want that inherit tag to apply to children. And then this individual elements, we also want to have all of these spheres that are emitted to be recognized as individual spheres with their own individual physics or dynamics applied to each of those spheres. So you can see that if I just have that off, nothing is happening. Our spheres are still not dynamic. What we need to do is say, recognize all of these objects underneath the emitter as individual dynamic objects. Once we say all, we now have this happy, joyous explosion of spheres, and it just puts a smile on your face, does it not? It's like popcorn. Popcorn popping. And we have all these really nice dynamic spheres. One other thing we can do is we can then duplicate. What if we wanted different sizes of spheres? What we can do is just say, all right, this is going to be the large sphere. We're just going to hold Command, click and drag, and duplicate that. And what this can be is the medium sphere. And we can drop this down to 13, and then I'll Command, click and drag again, make sure that's underneath the emitter as a child, and just make this 8 centimeters. So we have 3 different sizes of spheres. And now what's going to happen is you're going to see all 3 different sizes of spheres being emitted. So we have a little bit more contrast, a little bit more interesting particle emission there. Looking really nice. And let's just rename this small. So we have large, medium, small. And what we can do is then just rotate this emitter so it's facing downwards. And now they're just kind of falling. So this is perfect. This is looking good so far. What we can now do is with these dynamic spheres that are being emitted from our emitter is we can use them to fill up a volume. So let's go ahead and rebuild this little composition here. So what we had was basically our cube that was filled with spheres, and then we had a little like diamond shaped inside here, and we had clones filling in all 3 of these shapes. So we had the outer cube, the inner bit, and then this little pink diamond. So let's just go ahead and create all those things. So let's just create a cube, and we'll make this, let's just do 400 by 300, and we'll make this 100 centimeters deep. And let's go ahead and create our little diamond inside. So we're just going to grab a tube and make it face forward, so -Z, and you can see that we're kind of can't see inside of it. So what we're going to do is go into our cube, and for things like this where we got overlapping objects and we actually want to see inside an object, one handy option is in this basic tab. We can actually change this to X-ray so we can actually see through it. See a little X-ray of the cube, and we can do the same thing to the tube here, but you'll notice that we can, since they're overlapping, it's hard to tell where they overlap other than this outline. So what we can do is distinguish the tube by going and saying use a color, and we can actually use a color that is different from that gray, so we can actually make it out a little bit better. And since they're both 100 centimeters thick, what I'm going to do is just make this 1 centimeter thicker, and we won't have that weird glitchy overlap. So now we can actually manipulate all this stuff without actually turning off objects or anything like that. So now we can just adjust these rotation segments to 4, and we can create that diamond shaped again. And let's just make this a little bit bigger. Something like that. And I hate decimals, so I'm just going to round this up to 65 and 120. Cool. And now we can apply those collider tags, right, to these 2 objects. So let's go ahead in our cube. We'll go to Simulation Tags, Collider Body, and then we'll just command click and drag to duplicate that to the tube. And we'll just move this emitter up, right? And let's just make this emitter long enough so it's emitting in a wider space. So we'll go to the emitter settings and we adjust the X size and the Y size. So we'll just adjust this, and we can actually shrink this down a little bit. So you can see we're just fitting inside there. And let's see what happens. Let's hit play. And you're going to see that what happens is not what we want. This is not filling up the inside of this cube. And the reason why is because of the default settings on our dynamics tag here. So by default, we have this collision shape, which is basically set to automatic. And what automatic is just the fastest guess of a dynamic simulation for the object that you're using. It's the fastest, but it is the least accurate. So it doesn't take into things like hollow objects or divots in objects or bowls inside objects. It just creates like generally like an outer shape mesh. But we actually want this to recognize that this is a hollow volume. And to do that, we actually need to change the collision shape to something more accurate simulation. And the option that we actually want is this static mesh. And this is one of the most accurate options, but it also slows things down a little bit. So, but that's what we need to do. So we're going to go and choose static mesh, We're also going to do the same thing for the tube as well, because we're going to eventually emit some spheres inside of the diamond. So we'll change this to static mesh. And once I do that, I'm going to hit play, and you're going to see that now, whoops, let's undo that, go back to our main view here. You're going to see that we now have spheres being emitted inside that cube volume, which is exactly what we want, and that is all due to this static mesh. So what we want to do is make sure that we have enough spheres that it actually fills up this volume. So let's just make our composition a little bit longer, say 180 frames, and let's just see where our cube is fully filled with our little spheres here. So say around like frame 130, and let's actually have this fill up a lot faster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this emitter to just cube emitter, because we're going to have a few different emitter, one for the outer bit of the cube, one for inside of this diamond, and one for this little space here. So the cube emitter, let's have this fill up the volume faster. So let's go to our emitter particle settings, and let's bring this up to say 150. And let's see how fast that fills up. So this is filling up much faster, and at say frame 100 is where it's fully filled. So what I'll do is say, okay, this is fully filled, this cube is fully filled at frame 100. That's when I want to stop emission. So no more particles allowed after frame 100. So if I hit play again, I'm going to fill this up, and then at frame 100, emission is going to stop. We had one little sphere escape, that little tricky rascal of a sphere just popping out. He does not want to join this party, but we can fix that. When you have objects, dynamic objects, kind of popping out of objects, and it's not working very well, that is due to, again, the default settings of dynamics trying to be fast, but it's also not very accurate at the default settings. So what we can do is go into the dynamics, the project dynamic settings. So the dynamic settings for this entire project that we're in right now. And to do that, we're going to hit Command D and go into our project settings. And in our project settings, we have this dynamics tag, and under expert, we have this option right here. And basically what this steps per frames is the calculations per frame, or steps per frame. And right now it's fairly low at 5, but we have a lot of spheres being created and being emitted every 30 every 30 frames. So we need to up this a little bit more, because it'll be a little bit more accurate. So what we'll do is we'll crank this up to 30. And what this should do is hopefully prevent any spheres from kind of popping out. And you can see that actually by upping that steps per frame, and since there's so many spheres being calculated or emitted, it's actually picking up a lot of those in between frames that weren't recognized before. So what this is actually doing by upping this calculation is we're actually being closer to emitting the amount of spheres that we actually wanted in this emitter. So what we'll have to do is actually bring down this editor, because when there's so many particles being emitted at the lower settings, sometimes some of the particles get skipped. So when we up the calculation to being more accurate, we actually have all of those spheres or all of those particles being accounted for, not being skipped over, because we have so many being emitted all at once. So we just had to bring down our birth rate a little bit, and we just changed it from 150 to 130, and I think we're filling out pretty good. We could probably get away with 132 because I'm seeing a little bit of gaps at the very top. So we're doing this, and we're stopping emission at frame 100, and let's see if we have that rogue sphere. He doesn't pop out anymore, so this is good. And one thing to also notice is we don't have any more of that jitter happening either. So before we had a lot of spheres kind of jittering around and still moving after we stopped emission, but actually upping, I'm going to hit Command D again, go back into our dynamics particle settings, And upping that steps per frame helps tame those little jumping beans, those little jumping spheres that we had before. So this solves a lot of problems. Maximum solver iterations per step also helps up the calculations as well, but again, also slows things down. So if you're having stuff still pop out of the cube, you might need to up this as well. But I think we've solved that. I don't think we need to change that value at all because all of our spheres are staying inside, and they look pretty happy to me. So what we'll do is, this is looking good. We'll then go ahead and we'll command click and drag and just duplicate this whole emitter. And I think what I want to do is, let's just move this down and position this new emitter, and this will be the diamond emitter. Let's go back to frame 0 and move this down. And again, we need to actually fit the emitter shape inside of our little diamond shape here. So let's go to our emitter, shrink this guy here, and shrink it in the Y. Move this up just a tiny bit. We don't want this to intersect because then we'll have spheres emitting outside of that diamond shape. So what I'm going to do is just turn off our first cube emitter here and just deal with this diamond emitter. And immediately I know, because this of course is a smaller volume, we won't need as many emissions. We won't need as many particles emitting. So what I'll do is I'll just like half it, or almost half it, by just changing this to 60, and then just hit play. And you're going to see that we have so many of those larger spheres that we're having a little bit of an issue with too many of these big spheres popping up, and I actually want more of those smaller spheres to be in here. So what I'm going to do is, to have more small spheres show up, I'm just going to create more small spheres. And this will then almost double how many of the small spheres are being emitted versus the other two, the medium and the large. And I think what I'm going to do is just totally get rid of the large spheres there. So we just have the medium and the small. So let's see. I think that's filling up still too quickly. Well, let's just play that again. What I want to do is, because it's hard to see here, even with the X-ray, what I'm going to do is just turn off visibility on the cube by clicking this little stoplight till it's red. And what I actually want to do is click this bottom stoplight till it's red as well, because this top one means that when this stoplight is red, it won't show up in the viewport, but it will show up in the render if this is not red. So I'll just hit render. You can see that even though our cube doesn't show up in the viewport, it shows up in render. But if I turn this bottom button to red and hit render, you can see that it also doesn't show up in render as either. So this is exactly what we want. Let's do the same thing for the tube, or the diamond. Let's just rename this diamond so we can keep this naming structure straight. And we'll just turn this off so we can actually still see it in the viewport, but when we render, we don't see it. We only see the spheres. So perfect. So let's just turn off the visibility in the viewport as well. And let's just see how this looks. So at frame 100, it'll stop, and I think that looks pretty good. We don't have any spheres escaping or anything like that. I think that number I chose of 60 might work out just perfectly. So let's go ahead and turn back on our emitter and then all of our spheres for our cube back out here. And so we have the cube emitter, we have the diamond emitter, and let's actually first create a couple materials so we can actually recognize both of them. So for the cube emitter, I'm just going to make a white material, but for the diamond material, I'll make that like pinky magenta-y color. Let's just go ahead and do a little something like this. So these are just, placeholder materials. We'll develop these materials a little bit more later on, but I just want to see the difference of the different cubes, or the different spheres being emitted here. So you see this is looking good. No gaps or nothing happening here. This is looking really nice. And now what we got to do is fill in the little gap right in here. So what we'll do is we'll take this diamond emitter and we'll duplicate it and we'll rename this inner cube emitter. And what this is going to be, I'll just apply this white material to this for now. And what this is going to do, let's just go to frame 0 and turn back on our cube and our diamond. I'm just going to place this emitter inside of that little gap that we need to fill up. And let's just turn off the emitter and the spheres for our diamond emitter and our cube emitter. So we just see the inner cube bit. And this is going to fill up really quickly. So we're going to need to bring down this birth rate editor to say 25. And let's see. I'm going to let this play till frame 100 and see if that fills up completely. You can see it doesn't. So we still have some gaps. So let's just up this to 30. Go to frame 0. Let it play. Got this popping up, and this is filling up, and I think that fills up pretty nicely. Maybe 29, because I think it's packed so much we have that little jitter happening. So I think we're looking pretty good there. We have less of that jitter because our spheres are less packed in, and that's looking nice. And it stops, comes to a rest, no more jitter on those spheres, so I'm liking that. If you have too many spheres being jam-packed in that space, number one, you're going to have all these spheres pop out, but you're also going to have a ton of this jitter, right? So you need to walk that fine line between too little spheres and too many. So I think 29 was the one that worked before. Let's fill this up. Boop, 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 boop. Cool. And it's not jam-packed too tight. We got nice rest, no more jitter on those spheres, and that's looking perfect. So let's turn back on all of our spheres, and let's hide the cube by clicking the little stop sign, traffic light thingies to red. So this will not show up in viewport or render, as you can see. And let's hit play. And we have all of our 3 emitters. So we got our cube emitter, our diamond emitter, and our inner cube emitter playing, and they're all stopping emission at frame 100. And that's looking good. And I'm digging that. I see that we have a little bit of movement here, but it all stops once it gets to about frame 180, so that's good. I think this is looking pretty dang good. So let's go ahead and let's start developing this out a little bit more. Let's add some lights. Let's add some textures, so like nicer textures than we got here. But before that, what I want to do is actually just bake this simulation, so I don't have to keep playing this. And when I want to actually see what this looks like fully formed, when I'm getting my lighting and my texturing right, I want to actually see that without having to waste my time playing through this simulation. I actually want to cache it. And basically what a dynamics cache is, if I go and select all of my dynamics tags here and go to the cache field, I can bake all of the caches of all my dynamics by hitting this bake all button. Basically, when I hit this button, it's sort of like RAM previewing in After Effects, where I'm just storing this dynamic simulation to my RAM or to my memory. So this is a perfect way to, once you've got the simulation down, you like the way it looks, and you don't want to deal with it anymore, you just want to bake it and save it, cache is what you want to do. Alright, so we have our dynamics fully cached, so we can just hit the play and we have full speed ahead, full cache. We don't have any of those jerk spheres jump out or anything, and now we can, again, just go ahead and just go all the way to the end here, and we can actually see what this looks like at the end, and now we can start lighting and texturing and seeing exactly what this is going to look like. So perfect. Let's get to lighting and texturing. So let's just create a area light. And let's just go to our 4-up view, click that button right up there, and just move my light. And this is going to be a light up right over to the left, and just kind of angle it so it's facing our scene. Let's go ahead and add some area shadows. Let's go ahead and create some fall off so it actually behaves like a real light source, where it doesn't actually, light source doesn't go to infinity, it actually falls off a little bit. And you can see just in our viewport here that the lighting is kind of hot, so let's just bring this down a little bit. Let's see what that looks like. Looking good. We got our shadows, but it's too contrasty, so what we're going to do is let's create another light, and let's just make this more of like a rim light. So let's put this right back behind it a little bit so you can see just a nice little backlight. Let's turn off shadows for this one, so we only have one light with shadows, and let's see what this looks like. I'm liking that. We have this nice back highlight here, this nice little rim kind of light, and right now we just have normal diffuse textures. So let's add some sexy reflections. Let's go ahead and add some Beckman reflection. We don't want any specular strength in here, and we just want a little tiny bit of reflection. Say like 7%, a little bit goes a long way. And we're going to change the attenuation to additive, and then also add this on top of our specular. And let's just make this specular a little more sharp. So something like that. And let's add some luminance to this. So I'm going to copy the color channel to get that pink and load it into luminance. And what this is going to kind of do is almost give this like a glow, or like it's being lit from the inside. So let's see what this looks like. So you can see that looks nice. You can see that the shadows are a little bit lesser there. Almost looks like these little spheres are glowing a little bit. I'm digging that. So I think that's good. What I'm going to do is just duplicate this, and since I like the reflection and everything, instead of just loading in this stuff to the same to this white material, I'll just rename this white and just change this to like a gray. Change this luminance to gray as well. And maybe bring this down a little bit more. Bring the luminance down, and then just I'm going to hold Option and just drag that over, and that'll replace that white texture. And we can hit Render. And you see that the white spheres are a little washed out. I like how the pink ones look, so let's actually get rid of some of the luminance there. Maybe make this a little bit darker gray. Something like that. And what we can do to make this pop a little bit more is adding some ambient occlusion. That'll add a nice little shading where our objects are close together. So let's go ahead to Effect. Let's go to ambient occlusion. And since our spheres are so small, our biggest sphere is, let's see, 17 centimeters. So 100 centimeters is a little bit overkill, because 100 centimeters is like pretty thick, right? So it's about one of these grid spaces here. If you can see these little square grid. Really what we want to do is not make the shading much bigger than our sphere. So maybe we only have like 15 centimeters. So that's how much it like blurs out. So we can render here, and you can see the little bit of shading that happens, especially in the pink spheres. You can definitely see that definition, that nice contrast where our spheres are touching, where there's that little nice ambient occlusion shading. That's looking really nice. We can probably get away with making it a little bit lighter so it's not so contrasty. That's looking a little bit nicer. So that ambient occlusion definitely makes things pop. I think what I want to do is maybe up the luminance a little bit, just so the shading on that sphere isn't so dang harsh. Hit Render here. I'm liking that a lot more. One thing I'm going to do is add some nice highlights, like reflective highlights on my sphere by going into my lights, both of them, going into my details. I'm going to turn these into softboxes. So right now, our lights are showing up in specular, but they're not showing up in reflection. So what I'm going to do is turn that on. And what's going to happen is these little square shapes are going to become soft boxes that'll show up in the reflection. And what I'm going to do is just up the visibility multiplier, or the strength of that shape, to like 1500. And what you're going to notice is you're going to see a little square. It's very faint, but you can see a little square highlight where that little softbox is, and you're going to see it much more noticeably if I actually make this softbox square a little bit wider and bigger just by dragging these handles out. Now let's see what this looks like. You're definitely going to see a huge rectangle right there being reflected in our spheres, and you're going to see that this is kind of like creating a nice little softbox there. This is a little too overkill, so what I'm going to do is just move this up and just grab our handles here and just shrink that down. I just want a little tiny softbox shape, but for this back rim light, I'll make this a little bit bigger, and hopefully this will show up on our spheres. Let's hit render. So you can see just a little nice little highlight. Looks nice. Looks like a little bubble gum or something like that. And then you can also see kinda like right here on this sphere, you can see that back softbox shape as well. So we got that nice little rim highlight looking there. Let me move this and rotate this up a little bit. All right, see what this looks like. So we got our nice softbox reflection in the front, and then of course all these spheres are reflecting each other, so we got these really nice reflections. And I'm digging that. We got that softbox, nice little rim highlight off the back there. I'm liking it. So what we can do now is, I don't want a black background. Let's just create a background here, and we'll just make it white. So I got my background. Let's create a new material, apply it, and this will just be a solid white color just by loading solid white in the maybe a little bit grayish in the luminance, and that'll actually show up in our render as a white background. And what we can actually do is, we don't have any color introduced into our light, so we can actually do that. Maybe pump some yellow into the one light, and maybe some blue into the back, just to give it a little bit more contrast. Because no light is really purely white, really. So that's looking good. I think that's a little bit too yellow. So just tiny bit. Cool, and that's looking a little bit more realistic. And since we have our dynamics cached, basically we can just go ahead and just render this bad boy. The thing you're going to notice is that since we have this cache, we can actually just render a random frame in the middle of our composition and see what this actually looks like. We can again go into our filter here and start playing around with some of the curves and all this stuff to see what this would look like, if we need to adjust any of the shadows or anything like that, or if we can just fix some of this stuff in post to make this look a lot nicer, up the saturation there. A lot of cool stuff you can do in the filter tab here, but you can render all this out and get this really nice dynamic emitter kind of thing here. Alright, so hopefully that is a nice little intro to dynamics that can equip you to make your own nice little dynamic compositions. We learned a little bit about dynamics, a little bit of an intro to it, how to create an emitter to emit dynamic spheres that we can use to fill up volumes and create a nice little like logo reveal. So if you have any questions about anything I covered in this tutorial, please leave them in the comments section. If you create anything using this technique of filling up a dynamic volume, please share it with me on Twitter, on Facebook, in the comments sections. I always love to see what you guys are coming up with. If you like this tutorial, please hit the like button. I'd really appreciate that. And as always, I really appreciate you out there watching all of my tutorials, and I'll see you all in the next one. All right? Bye, everybody.